Saying yes has cost you more than any mistake you've ever made. Not loudly, quietly, in ways no one claps for. It happens in the half-second before you answer, when your chest tightens but your mouth still says sure. When you replay the moment later on the drive home, in the shower, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering why your own needs felt less real than their disappointment. You don't even feel angry, just drained, hollow, slightly erased. What if this isn't kindness at all, but a learned survival reflex? What if the part of you that can't say no is protecting something far older, far more fragile than the situation in front of you? Because this story isn't about boundaries. It's about the moment you learned that love felt safer when you disappeared. It doesn't begin when you say the word. It begins just before it. That small pause, barely a breath, when your body already knows the answer, but your voice hasn't caught up yet. Your shoulders tense, your stomach tightens. There's a flicker of something like resistance, or fatigue, or dread, and then it's gone, covered over by politeness, by instinct, by the familiar sound of yourself agreeing, yes, leaves your mouth smoothly, almost automatically. It's practiced. It doesn't shake. No one notices anything unusual. That's the strangest part, how invisible the moment is, how nothing seems to happen, even though something in you quietly steps back. Later, the body remembers. It remembers in the heaviness behind your eyes when the day finally ends, in the low-grade irritation that has no clear target, in the way you replay the scene, not dramatically, just enough to sting, wondering why it felt so hard to say something so small, so reasonable, so human. You tell yourself it wasn't a big deal, that you're overreacting, that this is just how you are. Helpful, easygoing, understanding. You've learned to narrate the erasure gently, so it doesn't sound like loss. But there is a cost, and it accumulates quietly. Each quiet yes teaches your nervous system the same lesson. Your comfort is negotiable. Your limits are flexible. Other people's needs arrive with urgency. Yours arrive as suggestions, easily postponed. Over time, the signal from inside you grows faint, not because it isn't there, but because it's been interrupted too many times. This is why the exhaustion feels different. Why rest doesn't quite restore you. Why you can't point to a single cause. Because what you're tired of isn't doing too much. You're tired of leaving yourself out of the room. And the most unsettling part? No one taught you how to notice the moment when you disappear. You just learned how to do it quietly. You weren't born like this. No child arrives already knowing how to disappear. You learned it in rooms where tension hovered just beneath the surface, where moods shifted without warning, where love felt present but conditional, unpredictable, easily disturbed. You learned that being easy made things smoother, that asking for less kept the peace, that noticing others before yourself was safer than being noticed. Maybe no one ever said it outright. They didn't have to. Children are brilliant observers. You watched what happened when you spoke up, when you needed too much, when you said no, or cried too loudly, or wanted something inconvenient. You felt the withdrawal, the sigh, the silence, the subtle change in temperature. Nothing dramatic, just enough to teach you the rule. So you adapted. You became agreeable, attuned, hyper-aware. You learned to scan faces the way some children scan for exits. You felt pride when adults called you mature, good, so understanding for your age. No one noticed that what they were praising was your ability to fold yourself smaller without complaint. This wasn't weakness, it was intelligence. Disappearing worked. It kept you connected. It kept you included. It kept love close enough to survive. And for a long time, that was enough. It had to be. But the body keeps the memory, even when the mind lets go. Long after the original rooms are gone, the reflex remains. Your system still believes that harmony equals safety. That conflict risks abandonment. That saying no might cost you something you can't afford to lose. So you keep choosing connection over truth without realizing you're choosing. The past collapses into the present. Old rules masquerade as personality. And the most painful part? You don't vanish because you don't matter. You vanish because once, it was the only way you knew how to stay. What feels like a personality flaw is often a nervous system strategy. When you can't say no, it isn't because you lack strength or clarity. It's because your body learned, long ago, to associate safety with agreement. To your nervous system, displeasing someone doesn't register as a social inconvenience, it registers as threat. This is how conditioning works. Repeated enough times, the body stops waiting for danger to appear and starts preventing it preemptively. You don't weigh options, you don't deliberate, you comply. The relief you feel after saying yes isn't satisfaction. It's the easing of imagined danger, a quiet signal to your system, crisis avoided. Psychology has names for parts of this fawn responses: anxious attachment, relational conditioning, but names don't capture the lived experience. What it feels like from the inside is a soft panic disguised as politeness, a hyper-awareness of others paired with a dimming awareness of self. Over time, something subtle happens. Your internal signals, fatigue, irritation, desire, stop rising to the surface, not because they're gone, but because they've learned they won't be acted on. The brain, efficient and adaptive, redirects energy elsewhere. Why send messages that won't be received? This is self-erasure at the neurological level. The cost isn't immediate, it's cumulative. You begin to feel strangely disconnected from your own preferences. Decisions exhaust you. Resentment appears without a clear source. You feel responsible for others' emotions but vaguely absent from your own life. And yet, this pattern once made perfect sense. It kept you regulated. It kept relationships intact. It kept you from feeling the sharp edge of rejection or conflict when you didn't yet have the capacity to survive it. There is no pathology here, only adaptation carried too far into a life that no longer requires it. But the body doesn't update its beliefs automatically. It continues to run old software even in new environments, even when the danger has passed. Which is why saying no doesn't feel neutral. It feels like stepping off a ledge, even when the ground is right there beneath you. The moment passes, the conversation moves on. On the outside, everything looks resolved. Inside, something begins. At first it's subtle, a tightness in the jaw, a restless energy in your hands, a thought you push away before it finishes forming. You tell yourself it's fine, that you agreed, that this is what you wanted. You've already said yes, and saying yes is supposed to bring peace. But instead, a low-grade war ignites. One part of you insists you did the right thing. Be reasonable, be kind. Don't make this bigger than it is. Another part stays silent but heavy, registering the loss without language. This is where resentment is born, not as anger toward others, but as confusion turned inward. Why do I feel like this if nothing bad happened? The mind searches for a target, and often lands on you. You should have spoken up. You're too sensitive. Why can't you just let it go? So the conflict deepens. You're not only exhausted from what you agreed to, you're now at odds with yourself for feeling exhausted at all. The original moment is gone, but the nervous system hasn't stood down. It's bracing, replaying, scanning for meaning. This is the hidden consequence of the quiet yes. When desire and action diverge, the psyche fractures slightly, not enough to notice all at once, but enough to accumulate. Over time, this inner split becomes familiar. You start expecting the aftermath, the irritation that feels unjustified, the sadness with no clear origin, the sense that something was taken but you can't name what. And because the conflict happens internally, no one else sees it. Others experience you as reliable, generous, easy to work with. They don't see the cost because you absorb it privately. The war is fought in silence, and silence makes it look voluntary. Eventually, the body learns to anticipate the aftermath too. Even before you say yes, part of you knows what's coming. The drain, the self-blame, the quiet anger that has nowhere to go. Yet the pattern repeats, not because you're weak, but because the alternative still feels more dangerous. Saying no threatens connection. Saying yes threatens your sense of self. And so you keep choosing the injury. You know how to survive. It wasn't empowering. It wasn't confident. It didn't feel like growth. It felt like fear. The first time you didn't say yes, really didn't you noticed it immediately in your body. Your heart raced. Your breathing changed. Your skin felt too tight. The word no, or something close to it, sat between you and the other person like a live wire. Even spoken gently, it felt loud, dangerous, final. Nothing terrible happened. And yet, everything inside you reacted as if it might. You waited for consequences, for disappointment to harden into distance, for the mood in the room to shift, for something to be withdrawn. Your nervous system stayed alert long after the moment passed, scanning for proof that you had made a mistake. This is the part no one warns you about. The first no doesn't feel like relief, it feels like exposure. like stepping into cold air without armor. The old strategy had rules. It kept you oriented. This new one feels uncharted, and the body hates uncertainty more than it hates self-sacrifice. You might have second-guessed yourself immediately, rewritten the moment in your head, considered following up with an explanation, a justification, an apology, something to soften the rupture you imagined you caused. Because that's what it felt like, a rupture. Not because you actually harmed anything, but because you interrupted a pattern that once kept you safe. The fear wasn't about the present interaction. It was about old memories resurfacing without images. The body remembering a time when no did, in fact, cost something. So if that first no felt clumsy, shaky, or wrong, there is nothing broken in you. That fear is evidence of how deep the conditioning runs, of how much was once at stake, of how unfamiliar it is to remain visible when you don't comply. The shift doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with tolerance. Tolerance for the racing heart. Tolerance for not fixing the discomfort. Tolerance for staying. Because the real transformation isn't learning to say no. It's learning that you can survive being seen when you do. The instinct is to override it. When discomfort rises, tight chest, shallow breath, the urge to explain, you want to smooth it over. Fix it. Say something kind. Say something reassuring. Say something that puts everything back the way it was. You've spent a lifetime translating discomfort into compliance. But this time, you don't. You stay still long enough to notice what's actually happening. The sensation peaks, then wavers. The body wants resolution, but not all resolution comes from action. Some of it comes from presence, from letting the signal complete its arc instead of interrupting it mid-sentence. This is unfamiliar territory. Discomfort has always been framed as a warning, something to eliminate as quickly as possible. But here, it's information, not danger, not failure. Just the nervous system adjusting to a new reality where your needs are allowed to exist alongside others. You begin to distinguish between threat and tension. Threat collapses you. Tension stretches you. One demands escape, the other asks for capacity. As you practice staying, something subtle shifts. The urgency to explain fades a fraction sooner. The guilt still arrives, but it doesn't dominate the room. You start to recognize the pattern for what it is, an afterimage of an old rule, not a verdict on your character. This is where self-trust quietly rebuilds, not through bold declarations, but through repetition, through choosing not to abandon yourself when discomfort appears, through allowing the body to learn, in real time, that nothing catastrophic follows when you don't disappear. You may still feel awkward, uncertain, slightly exposed. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're listening to signals you were once forced to ignore. It means you're letting the body update its map of what is survivable. It means you're learning to remain present without negotiation. And presence, when it's new, feels a lot like danger. But over time, the sensation changes. What once felt unbearable becomes tolerable. What once demanded retreat becomes a space you can stand in, breathing, intact. You're not becoming harder. You're becoming more real. At first, what remains feels unfamiliar. Without the reflex to accommodate, there is space, and space can feel like emptiness when you're not used to inhabiting it. You notice your own preferences more clearly, and that clarity is strangely destabilizing. Wanting something means risking disappointment. Having limits means others might feel them. So you move carefully. You don't suddenly become assertive or unbothered. You don't stop caring. What changes is quieter than that. You begin to stay. When discomfort arises, you no longer rush to erase yourself to make it go away. You let it sit beside you, like something that belongs. And slowly, something else appears. A steadiness, a gravity, a sense of weight in your own presence. You realize that when you don't disappear, relationships shift, not always dramatically, but honestly. Some adjust, some resist, a few may even fade. And while that loss hurts, it carries a different quality than before. It doesn't hollow you out in the same way, because this time, you are still inside yourself when it happens. What remains is not a perfected self. It's a self that takes up space imperfectly. One that hesitates, feels guilt, still sometimes says yes too quickly but notices, returns, repairs internally. You begin to experience integrity not as rigidity, but as alignment. Your actions no longer consistently betray your inner life. There is grief here. For all the moments you vanished without knowing you had a choice. For how long survival masqueraded as personality. That grief doesn't ask to be fixed, it asks to be witnessed. And there is something else, quieter but enduring. Relief. The relief of no longer negotiating your existence in every interaction. The relief of knowing that connection doesn't require disappearance. The relief of being present in your own life, even when it's uncomfortable. You don't become fearless. You become less divided. And in that wholeness, fragile, ongoing, real, you begin to recognize yourself not as someone who must earn space, but as someone who was always allowed to occupy it. Not loudly, not perfectly, but fully enough to remain.